The psychological pathologies of our age are characterized by an over-identification with the ego. Now, the ego might be described as the autobiographical mind, the sort of conductor of the orchestra, right? Sitting at the top of the command and control hierarchical system that is the human mind, right? It's the voice in your head that lets you know that you exist. And the epidemic levels of anxiety and depression that we're seeing in society today are both attributed to the excessive rumination and self-consciousness of an overactive ego, essentially an ego that has become a tyrant. Now, this is not to say that our ego doesn't serve a useful function in the world, right? It's allowing me to record this video and exercise agency over my life, to fetch water, to chop wood, and to plan. That's fine, but that doesn't mean that the ego cannot metastasize, so to speak, that it cannot be corrupted, right? An excessive amount of ego leads to this rumination and self-consciousness, which is a kind of autoimmune disorder where you become your own worst enemy. And it's the reason that these bumper stickers will tell us things like the only thing standing in your way is you, or athletes, musicians, and artists, when they get in the flow, in the zone, in the pocket, describe the experience as one in which their mental chatter dissipates. We know from neuroscience, from fMRI scans, that when people are in their flow, in their zone, in a state of rhapsody, wonderment, and awe, their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex gets knocked offline, right? The seat of the soul, you might call, the ego's throne, is called the default mode network, right? And the default mode network gets shut offline, gets knocked offline during these intense and jolting encounters, right? Such as traveling somewhere new, hurling yourself into the abyss and realizing that it's a featherbed, taking a psychedelic drug in a controlled ritual environment, right? Diving into a new relationship. It seems that these intense and destabilizing experiences can often be ecstatic because they occasion a subjective sense of relief from self, right? A transcendence of the ego. And when we, right, as Jerry Garcia says, to get really high is to forget yourself. And to forget yourself is to see everything else. Often people who suffer from treatment-resistant depression see everything gray. They're so over-identified with their own entropy, with their own gravity, with their own weight that the walls are caving in. It's a failure of the imagination, according to Kierkegaard, from which depressed people cannot see the light outside the dark tunnel they're stuck in, that black hole of hell. Right? This is a disease of the self. Same too with paranoid anxiety or PTSD. These are people whose past trauma is now contaminating the astounding frontier of the present with terror of impending doom. This metastasized, overly active ego has led to a generation of suffering that is unfathomable to grasp. 800,000 people a year now are committing suicide, a larger number than the amount of people that die from natural disasters and armed conflict combined. In fact, a friend of mine from high school, I just found out, killed himself by hurling himself off a balcony. What has gone so wrong with us that our minds have become poisoned and disconnected from the world and from each other? What is missing, I think, is an egoless communion with everything. What is missing, I think, is the nourishing experience of connecting with something larger than yourself. And if psychedelics deployed responsibly in guided environments can be the therapeutic intervention that hurls us into a place beyond self, where we lose track of our own boundaries and experience an egoless communion with the radiance and rhapsody of nature and the cosmos, that occasions a mystical experience that catalyzes an aesthetic orgasm, We can finally all experience what psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna said, the moment in which you become what you behold. If it's a beautiful song or a radiant landscape, you become the music, you become the landscape. William James, the American psychologist, used to say, your experience is what you attend to. And the problem with the pathologies of our age, with the anxiety, with the depression, is that people no longer feel agency over what they attend to. They're stuck in these loops. They're stuck in these compulsive overthinking. They no longer feel free. They no longer have agency. There's nothing new to explore. But they're wrong. They're wrong. Michael Pollan describes the virginal noticing of the sensate world that occurs when you lose track of your own boundaries, right? When all signals forwards and backwards get knocked offline, the astounding frontier of the present reveals itself, and all of a sudden, that sense of first sight, unencumbered by knowingness, awakens us to our common ecstasy. For a transitory enchanted moment, we hold our breath. We're compelled into aesthetic contemplations we barely understand. We're face to face with something commensurate to our capacity for wonder, this cosmological wonderment, this moment of ecstasis, this astronaut overview effect in which we connect the dots and see the big picture is what Carl Sagan describes as understanding as a kind of ecstasy. This religious experience can absolve us of our suffering. We can die into the moment and we can be reborn. Alan Moore, in his book, The Archetype of Initiation, says, if you cannot submit, you cannot die. And if you cannot die, you cannot be reborn. It saddens me that so many people are suffering from mental distress, anxiety, depression, despair. All men lead lives of quiet desperation, they tell us. But I think there's hope. I think there's hope. I think the future is psychedelic. I think the future is transformation and healing. And so thank you to all the brave souls. Support all the brave souls carving this new path. Rick Doblin, Michael Pollan, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, Johns Hopkins University, Imperial College of London. You guys are doing brave work. Keep it up.